Well, for more on this, I'm joined by former head teacher Leon Hady. Leon, thank you for joining us. We know kids need discipline, especially after a year of lockdown, though, don't they?
Very much so, but there's a big need overall not to really blame the tool in terms of mobile phones and what they are. We have to look at the human side and supporting the children first as they come back into schools, rather than thinking so much about discipline. It's about rebuilding relationships.
Indeed. Well, is this just a completely different approach? Is it a generational approach? Because it seems contrary to exactly how things were when I was at school, but arguably older generations would say the kids were more disciplined then. Is that true?
When I started teaching in 2005, my trainer had said to me that things were exactly the same, different eras, different problems, but they actually manifest in the same ways. So you're always going to have one generation that looks at another generation and say they're not as good as we were, they aren't doing this, that and the other. The difference here is the technology controls and dictates how the brain reacts, controls the ability with which people can communicate, controls the style in which they communicate, and most importantly has massive effects on their concentration ability. So this is actually the first time you can say there is a reason that some of the tools young people have access to really will change their behaviour, their instances, their ideas around how they communicate with adults. Obviously, that doesn't really happen as much with this young generation. And obviously, they've just been through COVID, so no generation has suffered that. So you've got to imagine that this is going to be a very, very different kind of behaviour or behaviour need that we're coming back to. We've never had, if you'll excuse the term holiday, we've never had a holiday or a break this long from education in our lifetime since the war.
Indeed, and technology has played a big part, hasn't it? It's helped keep kids online. They've also been able to learn. But also, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it? That can also be a distraction, particularly mobile phones.
Yeah, when I was head, we had mobile phones for a while, and then there were some issues, so we banned mobile phones, and it did benefit us for various reasons, but we did it for select purposes. Ultimately, if I could, I'd much rather they were responsible with the tools that they had, but we had to take care of something. But the technology use and the way that we actually allow students to consume so many items, it's become a real crux and crutch for them. So there's a lot of times when actually, especially during COVID, it's been the main link for them for their education, the main link for their friends, the main link for information. Everyone's become an armchair scientist, especially in the time of COVID. So you can't underplay how important and how much of a connection they now have with their phones and screens. So taking them away in one fell swoop might not be the best thing to do.
Is it a case of then it's down to individual teachers, down to individual schools in how they deal with their pupils?
100%. And there are different schools, different academy trusts that have very different cultures of how they want their students to actually get across and how they want their students to use technology. And sometimes you will be able to tighten and take control, and sometimes you'll loosen, allow them to use things. But there's a big, big thing there. It comes back to that original point of trust and relationships. Indeed,
though. Looking at that survey, though, by the NASUWT about abuse of teachers, they found the report was half the teachers have been abused and some have been threatened, 10% have been threatened. So how would you deal with that type of situation?
Well, in the section, what we refer to it as is de-escalation in some instances. We talk about positive relationship management. Some people talk about behaviour management. And essentially, these are things that you cover in courses, you cover in training. And that's one of the reasons that behaviour hubs become something that are really, really useful. Essentially, you don't really want to have the point of confrontation and start to deal with it there. You want to have done a lot of things beforehand so you don't get into those situations. If you can de-escalate appropriately earlier on, then you don't get into those confrontational situations in the first place. Now, these things do happen, but you have to remember that this is also a point of call or a way that students sometimes express frustration more than they actually intend to act on the violence. Now, I'm not saying that that doesn't happen. I've been in that situation myself. But really what we're trying to do here is understand why a child is getting into a situation where they feel that is the way they have to explore that feeling or emotion, rather than it being taken care of and supported in a way much earlier on down the line.
What do you think of Gavin Williamson's hubs then? And is £10 million enough?
The amount of money that you can put into it will never really be enough in terms of what you're trying to do, but the idea is very, very sound. Essentially, what we're looking at here is something called best practice, and we do a lot of best practice with the videos that we now do in training courses around the world. But really, you're giving a kind of a showcase or a museum or a living museum where some of the schools who are looking for different ideas will go and see what other schools are doing, have mentors from schools who can actually guide them through it. And this has always been available informally. So a lot of schools, especially when I was ahead, I think one year we had 73 different schools come to visit how we actually handle behaviour and de-escalation and managing children in our school. But it was very informal. Someone would call up and come and see. So the fact that this is now a national programme is actually very, very good, because it allows you to see beyond your own context beyond the limitations in your school and see how different things are applied. And it doesn't just work bad schools learning from good schools. I think it's really worth pointing that out. A lot of good schools I know went to some schools that were more difficult because they had expertise, particularly in behaviour management, that some of the better schools were able to then use and utilise. So yes, it's an excellent programme, and we're obviously hoping that the schools picked have the time and resources of that 10 million that you mentioned to be able to deliver this and support this properly. But the key thing here isn't just about what happens on the day when they go and see, it's what the mentoring and support afterwards, what the impact measures are set to and how they're actually given and what ways they're allowed to communicate that to really make a difference.
Oh, we'll see what happens. Leon Hady, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.